Hey guys, it's Will. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, welcome to the channel and thank you for finding us. I hope you dig this video. This is a list video, a ranking rather, excuse me. So I want you to give me your ranking in the comments. I am ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street films because guess what? It's October, and every October I get hella excited to get to watch horror movies, and I especially love slasher films. I also really like zombie movies, and I like kind of gothic horror type of stuff like Universal Monster films and Guillermo del Toro and like that kind of stuff, but I really love slasher movies. Now, I have to add the caveat that the Nightmare on Elm Street series is relatively new to me. I saw the entire series about 2 years ago. Previous to that, I had seen the first film maybe 2 or 3 times, and I saw the remake when that first came out. Other than those two, I hadn't seen any of them until, like I said, a couple years ago, and then I went through and I watched them all. That being said, we all know who Freddy Krueger is. I had the glove when I was a kid, before, like years before I ever saw any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I had the Freddy Krueger glove, and I think I may have had the hat too, because you used to be able to buy those like at Halloween and stuff. You could go to the store and buy them, and he was like such a big presence in pop culture when I was a kid that I have this like nostalgic memory of the series, even though I didn't see it until very recently. It's an interesting thing. So 8 movies in the series because I did the original 7 and then the remake. And Freddy vs. Jason is not on this list and was also not on my Friday the 13th list for 2 reasons. Number one being because it's a crossover. Like, where do you put it? Like, which list would I put it on? I don't know. It's just like it didn't really make a lot of sense to me to put it on either list, so I just kind of left it off both of them. And then the other reason is that I haven't seen it since it first came out. So it's been like 20 years and it's not like in my mind enough for me to feel like confident to rank it. So let's dive right into this list. Like I said, give me your list, or it's a ranking really more than a list, isn't it? Because it's a ranking. Let's call it a ranking. Give me your ranking in the comments down below. So at number 8, I have the remake because it's kind of really bad. Okay, here's my story with the remake. A friend of mine was watching it. This is like right after it first came out, so it's probably when it first came out on DVD or whatever. A friend of mine was watching it, and I came in like in the first or second scene, and he was like, "You want to watch this movie with me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, sure, whatever." And I think we watched like an hour of it, maybe a little bit longer, and we were both kind of like, no. And that's all I've seen of it. Although to be fair, there's one scene in that movie that I've seen again because it was on YouTube at some point. Someone sent me the link and they're like, "Can you believe they actually made this movie?" And I'm like, "Oh, dude, I can believe it because I had to watch part of it." So there you go. No offense to anyone who was involved in that film. At number 7 on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, I will also say that other than the remake, I like all of these movies. I don't love all of them, but I really like most of them. I have Freddy's Dead: The New Nightmare. There are things about this movie that I do really like. There's like a weirdness to it that I appreciate. It kind of reminded me of the second Phantasm movie. It has like some similar plot elements to one of the Phantasm movies, which I thought was pretty interesting. There's the video game scene, which is batshit insane, which honestly I liked. Like, a lot of people hate that scene, but to me it was like so ridiculous and weird and goofy and out of left field that I was like, this is interesting. Like, it's an innovative, imaginative sequence, even if it's easy to laugh at because it's really dated and ridiculous. I found it to be more interesting than some of the more kind of what you might call traditional horror elements in this film that I found they were trying to make a 90s movie here. This movie came out in the 90s, right? And they were very much trying to make a movie that was not like the 80s slasher film. They were trying to figure out how to make a 90s movie influenced by, like underground stuff from the 80s and like other things like that. How do we make a 90s movie that feels more like authentic in a way, or grounded, or whatever, has more realistic characters and stuff like that? It doesn't find its footing, I feel like, but there are elements to it that I do appreciate. So this is the film in the series where I'm not going to say like I really like it. Like, I enjoyed it. It was fine. But it was rocky, maybe is the best way to put it. Patchy, like it has elements to it. You're like, yeah. So at number 6 on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, I have Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So this is a really good movie. That is the first thing I'll say about this movie. If you're unfamiliar with this film, it's almost like Scream before Scream came out. The movie is about Wes Craven trying to make a new Nightmare on Elm Street film, but he ends up becoming entangled in a plot that is like a Nightmare on Elm Street film. I don't want to spoil too much of it. It's a very self-aware movie, and it's very 90s. But like like I said with the other one, they were trying to bring it into them. This movie very successfully takes the idea of the 80s slasher film and brings it into like the very self-aware deconstructionist like meta kind of playground, if you want to call it that, sandbox of the mid, kind of like the mid 90s, early to mid 90s. And it works, and it's a really good movie. And the only reason honestly I didn't put it higher on the list is that it feels like a standalone thing where you have the continuum of the first five. Then you have the sixth one, which kind of sits on its own in this weird no man's land. Then you have this film, which is very much its own thing, that's kind of looking at the series and talking about it in this kind of meta way. And then you have the remake. So it's almost like there's like these phases to the series. And because this one is out of the continuity and doesn't have the same kind of like ambiance 80s vibes of the first five, I put it below them. But I would say it's just as good as most of the other movies on this list. So at number 5 on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, I have The Dream Master. This is part 4. There's a lot to like about this movie. I like the drama of the main character. There's some very like successful, surreal scenes in this movie. I would say that the story of this movie and just like the basic mechanics of narrative, like arrangement of characters, character relationships, like that kind of stuff, is more successful than let me just, maybe I should talk about these two movies at the same time. At number 4, so number 5 I have The Dream Master. At number 4 I have The Dream Child. I think a lot of people might flip those around. I might be wrong. Let me know in the comments. I think that The Dream Master is a better film in terms of the mechanics of the storytelling. The reason I put The Dream Child ahead of it in the ranking is it's more insane, basically. Like the imagery and like the scene where they're all at the dinner table is insane. And there's like this MC Escher-esque stuff where there's like weird staircases going in weird directions and people are like walking upside down. And it's got like borderline like cyberpunk body horror, like techno nightmare, like they really go full crazy with the imagery in the fifth one. And one of the things that I really love about the Nightmare on Elm Street series is the fact that it takes place in a dream world, and therefore the film has set itself up, or the series rather, excuse me, the series has set itself up to have full license to be totally surreal and weird and dreamlike and completely untethered from the realities of like physics and time. And you could do literally anything because it's not the real world that we inhabit that is bound by laws. It is a dream world of the imagination. And Wes Craven set that up really, really well in the first film, and then subsequent films explored that really, really well. And I think that this movie, the fifth movie, excuse me, The Dream Child, does a better job of going full crazy than The Dream Master, even though The Dream Master has really, really good stuff in it too. I could put these movies as a tie, and depending on the day of the week, I could rank them in the opposite order. It's really tough, honestly, to decide which one of these I like more for a ranking, but I just kind of went with my gut, and that's how my gut played out. So at number 3 on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street, and maybe this is another controversial ranking here, I don't know, series, I have Freddy's Revenge. I really liked this movie, like a lot more than I expected to. I didn't really know much about this movie going into it. Other films in the series I had heard a lot of fan chatter about, had seen trailers for online and stuff like that. I didn't really know anything about this movie. And it's really, really good. It's very homoerotic and seems to be looking at like living in this very homophobic like Reagan era and having repressed homosexuality and using like violence and terror as this kind of like metaphor for that. And I don't know if that's intentional or that's just what I see in it when I look back at it, but it's a really fascinating film to watch now and to see all of these things in and to see like the eroticizing of like male bodies. Like you never see that in slasher movies. Like it's all about like the female body and like eroticizing the female body, sexualizing women, and like, you know, toplessness, and like, you know, like all these are tropes of slasher films, and this film is, there's a lot of male bodies in it, and it's got a lot of homoerotic imagery and scenes in it, and it's got crazy imagination. Now, one thing that's interesting about it is it does actually break the rules that are established in the first film and that are followed in all the subsequent films. So in a way, it kind of sits out of the continuum of the canon because they break rules in this film that if you're really kind of thinking about it, you're like, it's not like Freddy's not allowed to do that, right? But that didn't really bother me because I was really into the movie, and it's got some really good sequences. If you like, for just straight up like slasher vibes and horror, it's got some really, really good scenes and sequences, but it's also got this other like really fascinating thematic thing going on. So I really enjoyed this movie. Like I said, a lot more than I expected to because I didn't know anything about it going into it. So at number two, you know what's left. If you know, you know, right? You probably know, but let's see. Nightmare on Elm Street ranking. The second item on my list is the original Nightmare on Elm Street. It's just a great movie. It really is a great movie. Like, it's a very important movie because it started this entire franchise. It did amazing things for Wes Craven's career. It introduced Freddy Krueger, arguably the greatest slasher villain and one of the great horror villains ever created, to the world. It's a very unique and original premise and idea. The execution of the film is very successful. I mean, it's obviously hugely influential on things like Scream and like a lot of these other movies. And I would argue that the Nightmare on Elm Street films and also the Hellraiser films are really, really influential on the direction they took in season 4 of Stranger Things with like the Vecna character and all that stuff. So, I mean, probably one of the most influential horror movies of the last like 40 years, but also certainly I would say one of the most original. I think probably the most original of the slasher films in terms of setting up this entire world and premise. And like, if you hear Wes Craven talk about this movie, he's a very, very smart person, really great writer, a really good director, but a very, very smart thinker in terms of the way he creatively approaches stuff. And you know, I mean, he talks about like dreams and the subconscious. Like, it was not, to him, it was not about like, let me go make a slasher movie. To him, it was about this idea of like the nightmare world and like preying upon people and like that. It's a really interesting concept. It's really well executed. It created this entire incredible franchise, an absolutely legendary film. And then we get to number one on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street film. So you know what it is. If you know the series, it's Dream Warriors. It's number 3. To me, this is the film that really fully realized the potential of what Wes Craven created in the first film. And you can actually watch interviews with the screenwriter and the director in which they talk about how they watched the first movie and they're like, Wes Craven has created this world in which you have a dream world, which means you are completely free to do anything. And you can come up with the most insane imagery you could possibly think of and do really surreal stuff. And it works within the world of the film. So they made a really, really good, successful, fantastic, entertaining, awesome teen slasher movie, right? Of the mold of like a Jason movie, a Halloween movie. Like, obviously Scream came a decade later, but in that mold of like teens and a villain and killing and the small town and like the group of kids and stuff like that, but with this insane twist on it, right? Of like really, really leaning into the surrealism and just having these crazy, nightmarish, outlandish things like constantly happening. And it's just, to me, this film is the greatest realization of the potential of the original. I think it's without a doubt one of the most original slasher movies ever made. And like one of the most original mainstream American horror films ever made. Just like the full gonzo commitment to the insanity and the surrealism of the promise of that premise is like fully manifest here. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love the imagery in this film. The characters are amazing, which obviously you'll know if you're familiar with the franchise. So that's number one on my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, Dream Warriors. It's such a freaking awesome movie. My name is Will. I thank you for watching the channel, and we'll see you next time.